The Case for the Resurrection by Lee Strobel. Big idea. The truth of Christianity rises or falls on one central question. Did Jesus actually return from the dead? If the resurrection is false, Christianity is refuted. If it's true, then Jesus is the unique Son of God, and everything changes. By using historical investigation methods, the same techniques applied to any ancient document, the evidence points powerfully toward the resurrection as the best explanation for the facts. Key insights. Insight 1. The resurrection is the key that unlocks everything. Jesus claimed to be divine, calling himself the Son of Man, a title with divine attributes from Daniel 7, and declaring, "I and the Father are one." Anyone can make such claims. But rising from the dead after 3 days in a tomb would be powerful evidence that those claims are true. As the Apostle Paul wrote, "If Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile." Practical takeaway: when investigating Christianity, don't get lost in peripheral issues. Focus on the resurrection. If it's historically credible, then Jesus is exactly who he said he is. Insight 2. Luke was a first-century investigative reporter you can trust. Luke, a physician and companion of the Apostle Paul, wrote 1/4 of the New Testament. He begins his gospel by stating he carefully investigated everything from the beginning so readers could know the certainty of the things you have been taught. Archaeological discoveries have repeatedly confirmed Luke's historical accuracy, including his references to 32 countries, 54 cities, and 9 islands with no mistakes. Practical takeaway: treat the Gospels as what they are, ancient historical documents written by people who interviewed eyewitnesses. If Luke is accurate in the small details he could have gotten wrong, it's reasonable to trust him on the larger matter of the resurrection. Insight 3. 5 minimal facts, accepted even by skeptical scholars, build a powerful case. Dr. Gary Habermas analyzed over 2,200 scholarly sources on the resurrection and identified facts so well evidenced that the vast majority of scholars, including skeptics, accept them. Jesus was killed by crucifixion, confirmed by all 4 Gospels, Tacitus, Josephus, Lucian, and the Jewish Talmud. Even extreme liberals call this as sure as anything historical ever can be. Jesus' disciples believed he rose and appeared to them. Paul knew the disciples personally and reports their testimony. An extremely early creed in 1 Corinthians 15, received within 5 years of the crucifixion, lists appearances to Peter, the 12, 500+ people, James, and Paul. Paul, a church persecutor, was converted. Paul had nothing to gain and everything to lose. His radical transformation demands an explanation. James, Jesus' skeptical half-brother, was converted. During Jesus' life, his brothers didn't believe. After seeing the risen Jesus, James became leader of the Jerusalem church and died as a martyr. The tomb was empty, the Jerusalem factor, proclaiming resurrection in the same city where Jesus was buried, enemy attestation. They claimed disciples stole the body, implicitly admitting it was empty, and the testimony of women, whose word had low credibility in that culture, all point to an empty tomb. Practical takeaway: you don't need to be a scholar. These 5 facts are agreed upon by experts across the spectrum. Ask yourself, what explanation accounts for all of them better than Jesus rose from the dead? Insight 4. The disciples were not hallucinating or suffering from groupthink. Hallucinations can't be shared. Yet Jesus appeared to individuals, to groups, to skeptics, James, and to enemies, Paul, over several weeks. Hallucinations require a fertile, open mind. The disciples were fearful and in despair after the crucifixion. The empty tomb can't be explained by visions alone. And liars make poor martyrs. The disciples willingly died for their conviction that they had seen the risen Jesus. Unlike modern martyrs who have faith in something they can't verify, the disciples knew for a fact whether the resurrection happened, and they died for that knowledge. Practical takeaway: when someone dismisses the resurrection as wishful thinking or legend, remember the historical timeline. The core creed in 1 Corinthians 15 dates to within 5 years of the crucifixion, far too early for legend to develop. Insight 5. Women as first witnesses is historically authentic. In first-century Jewish and Roman cultures, women's testimony was considered so worthless they couldn't serve as legal witnesses. If the gospel writers were inventing a story to gain credibility, they would never have claimed that women discovered the empty tomb. The fact that they did, embarrassing as it was, shows they were recording what actually happened, not what was convenient. Practical takeaway: that embarrassment factor is a powerful historical test. Details that would hurt the author's case are likely true. The women at the tomb passed this test. Important quotes. "And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile, you are still in your sins." 1 Corinthians 15 verse 17. I say then, has God cast away his people? Certainly not. Romans 11 verse 1. Even an extreme liberal like John Dominic Crossan says that he was crucified is as sure as anything historical ever can be. Liars make poor martyrs. Michael Licona. All the strictly historical evidence we have is in favor of the empty tomb. William Ward, Oxford University. It would have required more faith to maintain my atheism than to become a Christian. Lee Strobel. Final takeaway. Lee Strobel, a former atheist and legal editor of the Chicago Tribune, spent nearly 2 years investigating the resurrection using his journalism and law training. He concluded that the evidence is overwhelming. Jesus really died by crucifixion, his tomb was empty, and his disciples, along with skeptics like Paul and James, were utterly convinced they had seen him alive. They were willing to suffer and die for this conviction, not because they had blind faith, but because they knew it was true. The resurrection is not a religious myth. It's a historical event supported by better evidence than most events of the ancient world. The question is not whether the evidence is convincing. It is. The question is whether you will respond by receiving Jesus as your forgiver and leader. Believe plus receive equals become a child of God.